Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Today on Ring of Fire, we'll explain how the pro-troop charities are funneling money to the Tea Party, of all places. We'll also tell you how Antonin Scalia's son is helping to destroy financial reform. And we'll bring you the latest on BP's attempt to weasel out of their oil spill settlement agreement. We have all that and more coming up. And right now, remember, you just stepped in to the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The Republicans have worked hard to convince Americans that they are the pro-military party, but a recent investigation has shown us that the Tea Party is using one of the largest pro-troop charities as their personal piggy bank. Joining me now to tell that story is David TeSelle. So, David, you have all these flag-waving, holy mouth, we love our troop types that now we find out are frauds. They've got fundraisers going on. Let's help our troops. And the Move America Forward is one story that has been really focused on. ProPublica has done some incredible investigative journalism on this story. It's nauseating. I mean, this story is nauseating.
Mike, first, thanks for having me. Yes, ProPublica has done some amazing work here, especially about Move America Forward. We're talking about a conservative Tea Party charity, and I use quotes around that, that was set up purportedly to help out the troops in Afghanistan, which is a great charity. It's a great cause if that's actually what's going on. But what we've learned is that some of these charities aren't actually being set up to actually do charitable work. They're actually being set up as covert PACs or as operations to actually raise money and to not really care about actually doing the charitable work that they claim that they're doing in their mailers and their emails and their commercials.
Well, David, don't people get prosecuted for stuff like this? I mean, they're out there saying, they're out there. This story that ProPublica did is almost, you have to read it twice to believe that this is actually going on. But they're taking money from charitable donors, and they're saying, we're taking your money and we're giving it by way of care packages, by way of a whole host of things we're doing for the troops in Afghanistan.
It's incredible. You look at what happened in February of last year when they sent out a mailer, when they raised money, saying that they were raising money to send out care packages to 800 Marines in Afghanistan, the Geronimo 1st Battalion. And then they announced that they had been successful in doing so and that they had given all of these care packages away after raising all this money based upon these representations. And what ProPublica found was that these Marines weren't even in Afghanistan at that point in time. They were in Okinawa, Japan, 3,000 miles away. It's amazing. It's incredible. The fact that these charities are then sending out mailers that are saying, hey, look at what we're doing. Look at the thank you notes that we got. Look at the pictures that we've been sent from Afghanistan. And what ProPublica was able to do is go and find that those pictures, while they were legitimate pictures, were from 2004, 2003, 10 years ago, having nothing to do with the troops that they were supposedly raising money for, and nothing to do with these actual charities. And then ProPublica, as I know we're going to get into it, ProPublica looked even further as to who these charities are tied to. And they're tied to huge super PACs that are raising money for Tea Party and right-wing conservative groups.
Okay, so now we know the story now. We know that for example, I think they've raised, I think 2008 to 2012, they raised around $8 million.
Incredible.
About half of it came from something that's called the Troopathon. What is the Troopathon? I mean, it sounds like one of these, the son of Billy Graham going out on some of these fraud campaigns that we see.
It's crazy. I mean, remember, these charities have been able to get Dick Cheney and George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush to give testimonials and back them. But now they have this annual Troopathon that you're talking about. They just raised $300,000 from this in June of this year, where it's kind of like, if you remember the Jerry Lewis telethon, but they basically say they're raising a whole bunch of money for the troops in Afghanistan, and it's people like Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, who are giving their endorsement to this type of stuff, and they get conservative leaning celebrities such as Gary Sinise, who came and he actually gave money and helped promote to raise this kind of money.
Gene Simmons, Sean Hannity.
Absolutely.
Well,
Sean
it's not they're just giving them money. They're giving credibility to this organization that there's some serious questions about. Now, first of all, here's what's so terrible about all this. You have troops over there that are counting on a lot of this. In other words, you have troops that don't have any communication with anybody unless you have legitimate organizations doing the kinds of things that they should do. And if you listen to what these people's mission statement is, it is to try to give these troops something, a little bit of dignity in the way they live day to day by, giving them care packages, staying in touch with them, putting on programs for them of all kinds that make their lives better. And now we find out that if you believe the ProPublica story, that what's happening is this money is going through PACs. I mean, that are directly tied to the Tea Party Express. They're tied to Sal Russo.
Conservative Campaign Committee PAC, the Move America Forward Freedom PAC. I mean, they have the same address in Sacramento, California, as the charity itself, where the charity is paying 100%, $82,000 of rent. They're paying the full rent for that facility, and there is no record of these PACs ever paying any rent for the use of those facilities.
Okay.
I mean, let's be clear. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. Charities in this country, charities perform an important function, especially for these troops, as you just said, Pap. These troops are dependent upon this for their services, for things for themselves, and we only allow tax-exempt status for charities based upon the fact that they're non-political, that they're raising money for a good cause, and that they will not share facilities and equipment and mailing lists and other assets with people that have political motivations instead of charitable ones.
Okay, let me tell you how crazy it is. Some of these stories are they're nauseating. I mean, you've got this care package, for example, is supposed to have been put together, and their argument, the charity's argument, pay $25, and that $25 is going to go to putting items together for troops. Well, the truth is, most of the items are already donated, so there's no cost at all. The cost to package it is done by volunteers, and the overall cost at best is something between $11 and $12. But nevertheless, They're telling people you've got to pay $25, and then we don't know, of course, where the other money goes.
Well, we do know at least that some millions of those dollars have gone to Sal Russo, who's the person who's behind all of this, who put this together, in his firm, Russo, Mars and Associates in Sacramento. That the individuals are making millions of dollars from this, but they also are entering into agreements with themselves and their cohorts in terms of processing payments. We don't have any information about where that money is actually going and how much is actually being paid for those kind of costs. But over 30% of this charity's expenditures are going to those people and to their cohorts. That's obscene.
There are organizations that rate charities, and I think that there's a rating system between 1 and 5, 1 to 4. Right. This one got 0. Got zero
from Charity Navigator.
What was the organization?
Charity Navigator. They got 0 out of 4 stars. Can you believe that?
Yeah, well, here's one of the reasons. I mean, ProPublica looked at this, and one of the scams they did is they sent out this mailer to where they were trying to tell people who donate, look at these pictures. We're unloading all of this great stuff for these soldiers. And frankly, the picture was completely a fraud. It was a picture of soldiers unloading a Chinook helicopter with military supplies, and they were telling the people, gee, if you give this money, this $25, this is going to help a troop. It's just it's an ugly scam.
They can't just do this once. It's kind of they're serial in terms of their misrepresentations. They have to do it over and over. My favorite that ProPublica overturned was the picture of the troops that were eating Oreos. And they said, look at these. The best Oreos come from our relief packages. And it turned out they stole that picture from Operation Oreo, from the Oreo company, who actually has their own and sends it out. It's actually incredible.
Move America Forward, the name of the organization. They have this thing called the Troopathon. Somebody needs to do some serious digging in all this, because as Ricky would say to Lucy, they got some splaining to do. All right, thanks, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike.
Just another story we shake your head and go, really? Yeah. All right, take care, man.
Great.
Antonin Scalia has been one of the worst Supreme Court justices in modern history. That's not me speaking. That's everybody who's looked at the records. He's consistently voted against women, voted against workers, minorities, and consumers almost all the time. But he isn't the only Scalia that we ought to be worried about. His son is actively working to dismantle financial reform regulations. I have Howard Nations with me to tell us about it. Howard, most people paying attention believe that the Dodd-Frank protection for consumers and protection for our economy is already in place, and nothing's farther from the truth. First of all, remind us how Dodd-Frank works and why it's so important.
Well, if you start with the title, Mike, it's the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. All the things that people who receive their big funds from Wall Street hate. It went into effect, allegedly, on July 21st, 2010, when it was signed by President Obama as a response to the Great Recession. The idea was to change the financial regulatory environment, and it empowered the regulatory agencies to write 243 new rules with the idea to achieve financial stability, to hold accountability and transparency for the big banks, to end the idea that they're too big to fail, to end taxpayer bailouts, and to protect consumers against the abusive financial practices. It's been 4 years and 1 month since then, less time than we spent winning World War II. And what they've accomplished is half of it's been finalized in terms of writing the rules. 25% have not even been drafted, and other parts have been sent back by the courts for rewrite.
Well, what we see happening, first of all, obviously it's critical, or we're going to have another burn down. As you know, Tom Hartman, very, very capable writer, very capable modern thinker is the way I like to describe him, wrote a book, The Crash of 2016, and one thing that he talks about is unless you have these things in place, we're simply going to go through the same kind of crash metaphor, I mean, the same mechanism again. And so Patrick Caldwell, I saw that you wanted to talk about Patrick Caldwell in the article in Mother Jones that talks about how Antonin Scalia's son has become kind of the spoiler. Antonin Scalia's son is the person that's trying to deconstruct, completely obliterate Dodd-Frank because Wall Street and the Chamber of Commerce and all the right-wing freaks in the country who simply want to make as much money as they can and pass the risk on to the consumer, those people are all behind Antonin Scalia's son.
Yes, that's true. And Barney Frank says that he's a right-wing ideologue who's trying to ruin the rules, destroy the rules. Lisa Donner, who's the executive director of the Americans for Financial Reform, says, quote, Scalia has created this sense that we're paralyzed because if we write a rule, we're just going to be reversed. The way Scalia brought this about was he relies on one rule, the cost-benefit analysis, which is included in the Dodd-Frank rule, which says that the rule maker must weigh the efficiency and the competition and the capital formation against the bottom line of businesses, the effect on the bottom line of the businesses that they're trying to regulate. What's wrong with that, Mike, is it's a basic flaw because the analysis are hypothetical. They're based on hypothetical assumptions. Hypothetical assumptions are very easily attacked. So Scalia and the big banks have found a way to circumvent the rules by making these attacks on the hypothetical analysis, cost-benefit analysis done by the rule makers.
Well, there's another part of this story that's very troublesome to me, and I know it is to you since you're in Texas and you're affected by your residents there were affected by the BP disaster, the really criminal disaster is what it is. You had a bunch of criminals that allowed this to take place on our Gulf Coast. And so all of a sudden we see Scalia, Antonin Scalia, making decisions about whether or not an appellate issue should go forward with the Supreme Court. Now, the problem with that is Antonin Scalia's son, Eugene Scalia, actually is working for the law firm, the very law firm, Gibson and Dunn, who represents BP. Now, so if that's happening, imagine the cases where Eugene Scalia is making decisions for Wall Street types, actually working for Gibson and Dunn with the Wall Street issues. And those issues, obviously, any one of them could go up to the Supreme Court, but nevertheless, they're not saying there's any kind of conflict. Don't you see? I mean, just common sense tells you how stupid. How stupid has it become when we allow the son of a Supreme Court judge that's ultimately going to hear the decision that's being made say, yeah, it's fine, son. You go to work with Gibson and Dunn. You get involved in the appellate issues. Everything's going to be okay. I mean, doesn't just fly in the face of common sense.
Well, I have to make full disclosure, Mike. Justice Scalia is my second favorite federal judge of all times. Everybody else is tied for first. You're absolutely right, though. And what we're looking at here is Eugene Scalia has a home court advantage here because immediately after Dodd-Frank was passed, within 2 months after it, he brought this first argument in the D.C. court, which goes to the D.C. appellate court. And he claimed that the regulators are shoddy in calculating the impact on the balance sheets. Now, he won 2 cases, and what Barney Frank described as a right-wing D.C. circuit, which substitutes their own economic judgment for the rulemakers.
Well, I mean, they're all Republicans. I mean, if you across the board, they're Republicans working to deconstruct Dodd-Frank, working for Wall Street. Those Republican judges in the D.C. circuit are clearly tied to Wall Street. They worked for Wall Street before they became the judges, but they're making decisions now to deconstruct and obliterate the only thing that might save consumers going forward. I mean, isn't that kind of what's happening here?
Well, that's exactly what's happening. And then in the last one, the third case he brought in the commodities rule was struck down, where there was an 81-page rule. 20 pages of that was attributed to cost-benefit analysis, and yet that was still struck down by the D.C. court. So they just don't know where to go. The rulemakers don't know where to go.
But, Howard, what about that issue that you have? Now, let me just point out something else. Alito's son, the other Supreme Court judge that always rules for Wall Street, always is on the side of Wall Street, always rules against consumers, always. I'm not exaggerating. Always rules against consumers. Judge Alito's son is also one of the people that is connected with Wall Street, handling the Wall Street cases that go to the Supreme Court. And nevertheless, nobody says, isn't this a hell of a conflict? I mean, how is it that you do this with, for example, you talked about the D.C. appellate court. Well, you know the only appeal beyond the D.C. appellate court is the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden this conflict is just glaring. It's just staring us in the face, isn't it?
Well, that's why I say Scalia has a home field advantage filing in D.C. But, you know, he's getting some help from the SEC. There's a really very, very foreboding thing came out of the SEC earlier this year, and that is the Volcker Rule, the new version of the Volcker Rule, which is the absolute cornerstone of Dodd-Frank. The Volcker Rule is specifically designed to prevent too big to fail, and it prevents banks from making certain investments with their own accounts, things such as derivatives, the very things that led to the 2008 collapse. But the SEC announced that rule in January 2014, and when they did so, they did not even include a financial analysis or financial impact statement in the rule. I mean, where did Scalia and the big banks couldn't possibly be happier with that? That's just making it too easy.
Howard, it's a stacked deck. I tell people, they call me because they know that our law firm and your law firm handles these cases against Wall Street. I tell them, look, why would you give your money, put your money in a system that is completely unregulated, that the rules are all stacked in favor of Wall Street? I mean, at very best, tax-free municipals these days are the only thing you can even say, well, maybe there's some safety there, but I'm not even entirely sure about that. Howard Nations, thank you for joining me, okay?
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks.
BP has stepped up their efforts to avoid paying out the billions of dollars that they owe to victims along the Gulf Coast, victims who are still suffering from the company's 2010 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Joining me now to talk about the latest schemes from the oil giant is newspaper publisher Rick Outzen. Rick, the criminal enterprise BP simply won't give up. I mean, am I overstating that? I mean, I don't know why the media is so afraid to call this organization a criminal enterprise. They are. And so now the criminal enterprise has gotten to the point where they say everything we agreed to, every document we signed, we had thousands of our lawyers look at it. We paid them millions and millions of dollars. I think within the first 3 months they had paid, I think the number was somewhere around $150 million for lawyers, their lawyers, to review the agreement that they signed saying that they were going to comply with the agreement. And now they want to take this to the Supreme Court. They want Antonin Scalia, who they know they can count on. They want Alito, who they know they can count on, and Roberts they know they can count on, and Thomas. All these kind of yes men for corporate America, they want those guys to review this agreement that's been signed.
Right. Well, they want to ignore the fact that, like you said, they signed an agreement. The agreement set up territories that businesses within certain areas were going to get compensated for losses. And now they want to rewrite the agreement. And they want the American public to believe that somehow people who've been paid claims who are in the Gulf Coast area got their money unfairly, that they have been, that they got money that wasn't due to them. And what we know, Mike, is that from the very beginning, BP has tried to kick forward all the big claims, cherry pick who they wanted to give money to, people who would be willing to help sell their story that they're doing the right thing when we know they haven't been doing the right thing.
Well, one way they're doing this is, I mean, New York Times is a great example. They have paid so much money to the New York Times. We have lost, we kind of keep count of it as best we can, but it's in hundreds of millions of dollars that they've paid to the New York Times. So now the New York Times has done 3 hit pieces. The last one, I think, just a couple of weeks ago, not on BP, but on the victims, the people who've lost businesses, the people who, are so sick right now that many of them are hospitalized and may not even live. But the New York Times, because they've been paid so much money by BP, is now coming out saying, "Oh, poor BP." How could their lawyers have been so stupid? You see, that's the argument.
You're right. And we're being portrayed as being greedy people who are hurting this poor British company that could go out of business if they had to pay all the claims that they have in front of them. That
made $40 billion last year and was subsidized by taxpayers to the tune of about $10 million. Right. I mean, in other words, they're making $40 billion. Taxpayers are paying them $10 billion. And the settlement that they're engaging is they're writing it off and making taxpayers pay for it.
Right. Well, their big argument is that they estimated that it would be a little bit under $8 billion that they would have to pay in claims. That's their estimate, and they're upset that they may reach that number. You and I were talking back in 2010 that this was going to be closer to a $20 billion deal before it was all over, because the impact ripples throughout the southeastern part of the country. We know that, and we knew it back then. But all of a sudden...
But Rick, if you're a shareholder, okay, you're a shareholder and they lied to you as a shareholder, the shareholder has a right to bring a stockholder derivative suit and sue BP for lying. What does it mean when they lie? They say to the shareholder, gee whiz, this is only going to cost $8 billion. Their own people know inside that it's somewhere between $20 and $40 billion. Their own inside people say that. They lie to the shareholders, so their stock value goes up. The shareholder has to pay more money if he wants to buy more BP. So so they have to protect themselves from the lie that their lawyers created. I mean, isn't that where they find themselves right now?
Oh, it is, and you're right. A lot of it, even back in 2010, was done to prop up the stock prices. We know they wanted the public to believe that they could cap the whale. They had all these weird deals. They were going to high hat and top hat and all these things that they were trying to do. And we knew from the very beginning, engineers were telling my reporters, I'm sure they were telling you too, that they were going to have to drill a second well. There was no way to just somehow 500 feet, 500 miles, 5 miles underneath the Gulf Coast, Gulf of Mexico, that they could put a cap on this well. They were going to have to drill a second well. But they lied to the public because it would keep the stock prices up. They've done this now, for 4 years.
Well, Rick, do you remember when they went out and hired a professional liar? I mean, that's what this guy is. Those are my words. You don't have to live with him. He's a professional liar. His name was Ken Feinberg.
The Candy Man.
The Candy Man. His job was to go out and meet with shrimpers and meet with people who've lost everything and say, pat them on the back and say, gee whiz, we feel your pain. BP is going to take care of you. Now, while he was doing that, BP understood they had no intention of taking care of these people because they already had a strategy planned. And the strategy was that once they got to a certain number, they would say, and this is what they've done, they would say, gee whiz, our lawyers that signed this agreement were either so stupid and so incompetent that they allowed a bad thing to happen. So the argument is, the logical argument the Supreme Court should consider, if their lawyers are that stupid, the lawyers they hired, Gibson and Dunn and some of these other folks, if their lawyers are that stupid, sue the lawyers. Get the money back from the law firms that were so dramatically stupid is what they want you to believe. Understand, Rick, you followed this. Mm-hmm. There were a handful of us on the plaintiff side that were actually negotiating this. There were hundreds and hundreds of lawyers on the BP side that were reviewing everything and signing off on the document. As a matter of fact, they actually wrote about 3/4 of the document.
Right, and we understood from the very beginning, Mike, because I remember sitting down with the plaintiff attorneys and going through the settlement agreement, and they said, for people within the Gulf Coast zone, that if you were in this zone, you were eligible for a claim.
And understand, Rick, that was their plan. They came up with the zones.
Right.
They're the ones who said, let's do it by zones. Let's not do it where somebody has to show particular causation, particular elements of what they lost. Let's just do it by zones. They did that because they were trying to avoid being prosecuted by the Justice Department. And the Justice Department said, okay, if you work this out, everything's going to be okay. We'll go on business as usual. So they agreed to it on that day. Then after they got far enough away from the statute of limitations for more than just one person with their company to go to prison, they now have said, oh, gee whiz, we have a stupid lawyer defense. Our lawyers were that stupid.
Right. Well, they're going to the Supreme Court and they're saying, class action law says that there has to be a causal relationship between the oil spill and the losses, knowing good well that that's what they agreed to in 2012. And that's the disingenuous part of what we've been dealing with BP from the very beginning, Mike. It's always been say one thing, overstate the benefits, understate the losses and the risk, and then when you get caught, hope that the secondary headline is not as bad as all the honor they got with the first.
Rick, are they counting on the fact that Judge Antonin Scalia's son actually works now for Gibson and Dunn, and the Supreme Court Judge Antonin Scalia is going to be deciding whether or not there was agreement here? Gibson and Dunn are the people who represent BP, and also Alito's son also works for BP. You have Alito on the Supreme Court too. Are they counting on the Supreme Court being so dishonest that they're going to say, well, our sons work for these companies, we're going to fine for BP?
Well, Mike, the Supreme Court they set their own rules. They decide if they need to recuse themselves. To me, and you're the one who brought this story up months ago, and to your credit, it does create a shadow of doubt over their ability to be impartial, and I think that they should step aside. I think that this is too important an issue. People died on that oil rig. People lost their businesses, lost their homes. Their health is at risk, and we're going to sit here and play legal games so that a big multi-billion-dollar foreign company can walk away with just paying pennies on the dollar that they
my bet is you heard it here first. Scalia won't recuse himself. No. Alito will not recuse himself. Thank you for joining me, Rick.
Thank you, Mike.
Former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell is currently on trial on corruption and bribery charges. So far, things haven't gone all that well for this very, very active Republican candidate. But the McDonnell trial is really just a symptom of the larger corruption disease that's taken over the Republican Party. I have David Haynes with me to talk about that right now. You know, David, the McDonnell case really is not that tough to understand. I think if I look at what happens here, the McDonnells are simply saying that this love affair that the wife had with this, you know, this millionaire CEO of this company, that the love affair caused this character to give her money, okay? And it was unrelated to politics. The gifts were unrelated to politics, so there was no sense of quid pro quo. She didn't expect anything politically. It was just a sign of affection, and therefore there was no criminal intent to bribe. I mean, isn't that basically it in a nutshell?
That's essentially right. This defense was a surprise to many observers, frankly, that they've come out with this, and it really appears to be a defense of desperation and really estrains the credulity of the defendants. And I think it runs a great risk that this is going to backfire on them. This all began several years ago over a spat really between the governor's family and the chef. Believe it or not, several years ago they were accused they accused the chef of stealing items out of the kitchen, and he accused them of stealing items for their family as the kids went off to school and so forth. And fast forward years later, what we have is a trial, a scintillating trial, which is going on down in the city of Richmond involving bribery. This character by the name of Johnny Williams, who essentially is a snake oil salesman. He's a vitamin salesman. He was selling a product called a Natablock. Believe it or not, Pap, this was a tobacco-based product that was supposed to basically cure you of all your ills. The former Secretary of Health and Human Services in Virginia called him the Tic Tac Man because he looked like little Tic Tacs. And what you had is the first family that had financial problems due to real estate speculation, and they were desperate. Let
me back up on that just a second. First of all, we do know this. We do know that you had the governor's wife, Maureen, saying that the family is broke. You said, you know, she made these statements she has to live with. The family's broke. Our credit card debt is off the chart, and this debt is killing us. Those were her words. So now the prosecution has that to work with motive. So that it's not like they're able to say, gee whiz, these gifts were just gifts of affection. Because if you look at the Rolex watch that ended up on Bob McDonnell's arm, if that was a gift of affection, then there must be something going on between Bob McDonnell and this character. I mean, it's a weak defense. Tell me
how bizarre, very weak. Very weak. You know, if I was defending this case, I would defend it straight up that this is essentially the political system is broken, and that donors are in the governor's mansion, and this is what you know, politicians have to do. And not a great defense, but much better than this was some sort of affair. I mean, all the testimony is that they were madly in love with each other. And as you said, who gets a Rolex engraved for a husband when she's really, you know, interested in this other man? It makes no sense. They're grasping at straws, and it's a real problem which could backfire likely will backfire. The better defense is that, yes, they took all this money, but he didn't really get anything in return.
Right, but the problem is they did. The problem is at this point, if you believe the prosecution's case, then what actually happened was you had the governor introducing Johnny Williams, the man who was supposed to have an affair with the governor's wife, introducing Johnny Williams to regulators that could make it that could go easy on how he did business, and to new investors that were actually inside the board, the governor's board. So, I mean, if you take a look at this, it's a very stretched argument to say that these gowns that this woman got, gowns that she could attend inaugurations with, there was money that was going on. These were designer gowns. These were multi-thousand-dollar gowns, jewelry, shoes, vacations. And then all of a sudden, the wife says, no, you know, that was just really all about his love for me. But then the watch and the golf trips, That's kind of a fly in the ointment for a defense, isn't it?
It makes no sense. I mean, $50,000 of stock to Star Scientific that they tried to cover up, tens and tens of thousands of dollars of loans. The total is about $165,000. The prosecution's case is clearly that Williams got all kinds of access to the governor's mansion that no one else would have gotten if he hadn't been doing all these financial favors. List of 25 guests to a reception of medical leaders throughout the state, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services thought those people had no business being there. So that's the prosecution's case, is he got a lot of access, a lot of privilege, a lot of introductions. The defense should be focusing on, well, did sales go up? What did he get concrete? I think it's certainly enough to show fraud, but to come up with this other defense shows how desperate they are. And it's a terrible, it just shows if you want to go into public service, go in for the right reasons, not to try to cash in and use the governor's mansion for your financial motive. It really is pitiful. This is a man who was talked about as a vice presidential candidate, possibly a presidential candidate, and we see what they were really made of.
Well, this tells you something else about how desperate the Republican Party is to find any kind of leadership, too, isn't it? I mean, if you take a look at this guy's history, this was Governor Sonar, as you remember them calling. This is a guy that voted. He passed a bill, wanted to stand behind a bill that would cause a woman to have an ultrasound probe put in her body before there could be any abortion. I mean, so he doesn't have any what I would call groundswell support from the average voter out there in Virginia, except this jury. If we take a look at the jury, maybe they picked the right jury. Maybe they picked the jury that is going to give him a free pass for these political antics, for this obviously bribery. It's obviously corruption. There's really no question about it. But you can still get what they call a jury pardon if the jury likes his politics.
Well, McDonnell is a charismatic person, or he certainly was for a while, but now his true colors have come out. I think the challenge is for the prosecution to show, really, was this access and this entree enough to really meet the standard of bribery. And of course, it's a beyond a reasonable doubt standard in the criminal setting. So it is a difficult standard for the prosecution, but they put on a very good case so far. Evidence is coming in very well. And as we said, the defense that they're putting forward is practically laughable.
Well, it's a stretch. Any term. As I say, the Rolex watch is the biggest problem, because if the defense is that all these gifts were just signs of affection from Johnny Williams to the wife, okay, but it doesn't make sense. The golf junkets don't make sense for the governor. The Rolex watch sure doesn't make sense for the governor unless Johnny Williams and the governor have some kind of sexual relationship going on too.
Absolutely. As you said, this was a candidate from a former governor who make very good presidential candidates, typically coming out of the governor's mansion as opposed to the Congress. And the Republicans now, when you look at the field, in 2016, it's very who Rand Paul.
Yeah. Ted Cruz. How about Ted Cruz?
Now, Ted Cruz. It only gets worse. And so this is someone that could have been a very viable candidate, presumably, but again, caught up in money troubles, and it's very sad for the state. Chris
Christie gone. Jeb Bush already having problems. Ted Cruz crazy as a loon. Rick Perry. I mean, the glasses don't help at all. So I think they're in trouble. Anyway, thanks for joining us, David.
Thank you, Pat.
The Obama administration is still trying to figure out how to fix a decade of corruption and incompetence within the Veterans Administration. And while they take their time, thousands of U.S. veterans are suffering and unable to get medical care. Joining me now to talk about the latest with the VA healthcare problem is attorney Christopher Lavorato. Chris, the story on the VA seems to get uglier. The more we learn about it, the more we learn that a lot of the absurd negligence. I mean, I don't even know how to call it negligence. It's just almost recklessness. That it was really a matter of people that are kind of in a bureaucratic setting that wanted to make bonuses. They wanted to move by way of promotion because of their job. They wanted to hold their little realm of power. It's kind of an ugly story the more we learn about this VA scandal. What is your take on it?
Well, I think you're right, Mike, and thank you for having this segment. I think to the extent that we continue to put this issue before the American public, it's only then that the folks that are involved with this debacle are going to be held accountable. I think that Tom Coburn hit the nail on the head. The Senator Coburn from Oklahoma, when he did his study, he found that over 1,000 vets could possibly have died from the negligence that's been perpetrated in this particular situation. And what really is sad is when you find out that during the same time period that these vets were not getting their treatment or denied treatment, that the VA spent $20 billion on non-health projects, it's astounding to me. So that's what I think about it.
Yeah, it is. The astounding thing to me is that when there's always the trail of shame when you follow a story like this, and there's always, the media is always out there trying to pinpoint where did it start, where did it end. Well, first of all, it hasn't ended. And if you take a look at the start came when you had the Bush administration cutting the VA every kind of way they could. I mean, it was amazing. You had flag-waving Republicans that were talking about how they really cared about the people that were serving this country overseas. But then when you took a look at how badly they cut those very same people when it came to care, when they returned home, when it came to education, when they returned home, it was a pretty ugly story. But there's plenty to go around. The Democrats then took over, and they had Eric Shinseki that was supposed to do something, and I guess he did what he was supposed to do. He audited what was happening with the VA, and then it started going downhill from there, even after the audit, didn't it?
It did, and like you said, this problem's been around since 2003. This country's been at war or in armed conflict for well over 12 years. And if you'll recall, in 2001, under George W. Bush, there was a government accountability office that conducted an audit. And even way back in 2001, Mike, there was a finding that there was a 2-month delay in medical service. Followed by in 2003, there was a commission that was installed by President Bush that then found that there was a 6-month delay. Now, I got to hand it to CNN. In a lot of ways, over the course of the last 10 years, they've been following up on this story. And then most recently, in January of 2014, that's when the story really broke, and the public was then brought back into the forefront of this entire issue. But yes, there's blame to go around on all sides. And the bottom line is the only folks that are getting hurt are the vets. And those are the people that we asked to make the sacrifice for 2, 3, 4 deployments in a row. And it needs to change.
Well, let's put it in perspective, okay? If you found that you had a melanoma, or you suspected that you had a melanoma on your arm, and you went to a doctor, a private doctor, and you had insurance to cover the care, the private doctor is going to say, well, you don't wait on a melanoma. You don't wait 2.5 to 4 months to get in here so I can treat the melanoma. But there's actually cases right on point. As a matter of fact, you talk about CNN. They did a great story on a fellow named Terry Mitchell who died. There was no question about his death being causally related to the fact that the VA had delayed him getting into the office to be treated for a certain kind of cancer that they probably could have at least slowed down. They could have extended his life, possibly cured him. But no, he ended up dying. And the problem about this, Chris, as I look at it, and I just want your thoughts on it, it almost sounds like what we used to see in the early days, and we still see it, but the early days of the HMO, where you would have some cat with an MBA that's never even taken a biology course, making a determination of whether or not we need to get these people in now. That's what was happening here. You'd actually have somebody that very minimal kind of medical training determining what's the timeliness of the need for care here. Is that how you kind of follow this story?
I do. But then you couple with that this whole issue of incentives and bonuses that were being provided to the administrators in connection with how many vets they would get into their facilities. And as you know, there was a 14-day time period in terms of providing medical care to these vets that requested it. And to the extent that these administrators were able to get more and more vets in, at least on paper, they'd get bonuses. So it even goes beyond the HMO issue, because of the incentives that were being given. And thankfully, it seems like now, and I think maybe even started under Shinseki before he left, those incentives have been taken away. But I agree with you. When it comes to any sort of physical ailment such as a cancer or liver problem or heart problem, and not just those, but mental problems such as PTSD, those things need to be taken care of.
Well, Chris, I'm sure you saw the memos that came out where the military was trying to discredit post-traumatic stress disorders, not because they didn't believe in them, but because they didn't think that if they handled all those disorders, that they couldn't work within their budget. It wasn't a matter of, is this real? It wasn't a matter of, will people run the risk of, as you point out, creating suicide, sending up to suicides, homicides of all types. It was that, gee whiz, we have to work on a budget. And the budget, if you take a look at the military budget, they're fine giving tons and tons of money to military contractors, whether it's Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, they're fine with that. But when we ask somebody to go overseas, and we don't pay them a lot. It's not like they're paid the same people, the same amount of money that Blackwater got for private contracting. We pay them almost nothing. They live in poverty. Their family back home lives in poverty. They come home without, many times they've lost their home. They've lost everything because of their sacrifice. But the one thing we tell them is, gee whiz, maybe we can give you medical care.
That's right. And medical care is not a perk. See, that's what needs to be known. And the American public needs to understand that medical care for these vets isn't a perk. They've earned this medical care. It's a right. And so, when one talks about, well, we don't have the resources to treat PTSD, well, then maybe they should divert part of that $20 billion I talked about earlier for non-health projects to PTSD. Or what about the conferences that we've heard about that the VA's conducted at these plush hotels, eating the best of foods?
Yeah, well, it's okay to ask somebody to serve, but you know what? We ought to have the decency when they come back and they've already sacrificed everything financially. Their families has sacrificed everything financially. We at least ought to be able to honor the one promise we made to them, and that is we'll make sure that you're handled medically. Chris, good luck with your cases. I know you're the perfect person for this, having had a long military career yourself, and I know you'll do well with it. Stay in touch, okay?
Thank you, Mike.
David, the stories, I always like to close with kind of a collection of the crazy stories out there. There's certainly plenty of crazy stories out there this week. How about the Texas Republican, this lawmaker saying that, gee whiz, his name was Doug Miller. He's Republican from Texas. He says, I'm glad to have these militia simply patrolling the borders without any recognition of what they may or may not do when they confront people crossing the border. One of them, the commander, says, what I tell my people to do is to point the gun directly between the immigrants, the would-be immigrants' eyes, and tell them to get back across the border. He doesn't seem to discern whether that person crossing the border is 8 years old or 10 years old or 50 years old. Simply point the gun between their eyes. And as you listen to what this commander has to say about how we're going to stop it, it's pretty lawless.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there's one elected official who seems to like this. However, I have a very, very close friend who works for Border Patrol, and he's down there on the border. And he's doing the best job that he knows how to do and balancing all of the different responsibilities. And he says unequivocally, with zero hesitation, that all of these militia groups are an impediment to the Border Patrol, that they don't like them, that they get in the way, and they're a danger not only to, of course, individuals potentially coming over the border, but to Border Patrol and to each other. And it's just a nightmare.
Well, what fuels this, of course, is, the guy with the new set of glasses, Rick Perry, that, Rick Perry's now out there in, gee whiz, I'm going to send 1,000 National Guard down there. They don't even have a clear mission statement about what it is they're going to do when they confront people coming across the border. There is no clarity at all on what they're supposed to do. It's just another sign. Rick Perry's got the new glasses, but he's still a total dunce and simply doesn't understand there's a way to handle this without conflict. It needs to be handled. I think there's plenty of people that would tell you, yeah, we need to have a system in place. Right now there is no system, and it seems even particularly lawless in Texas.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And Rick Perry seems to be the type of guy who at this point is just saying, yeah, okay, 1,000, let's send 1,000 National Guard troops down there with really no thought. You said it's not clear what exactly they're supposed to do in what situations. It's not clear even to Rick Perry. He thinks it sounds like a good idea, so let's do it. It sounds like it would be under the heading of patriotic if I were to talk to other Republicans about it. So let's go ahead and do it. There's no plan, and even the so-called plans that we're seeing from people like Rick Perry don't even really qualify as plans because there's no forethought. There's no end game here.
Yeah, none at all. What's your take? What about a story you might pick this week that you just say, you scratch your head and go, wow, what's up with this one?
Yeah, there's an interesting study, which it was a kind of a mugshot study where a number of white people were shown different collections of mugshots. One collection of mugshots had fewer mugshots of black individuals, and another collection had more mugshots of black individuals. And then after that, those people who were studied, the Caucasians, were asked to give their thoughts on what they think should be the criminal penalties for different crimes. Those who had been shown more mugshots of black people, in other words, those who came out with the belief, presumably, that the criminal justice system is incarcerating more black people, actually thought that the criminal penalties should be harsher. Now, when I read about the disproportionate imprisonment of minorities, I say to myself, well, we know that we have a prison system and a police system and so many other systems that disproportionately are targeting minorities for the same crimes, nonviolent crimes. I ask myself, how can we fix that system? Apparently, some of these individuals thought that the solution was just to give even harsher penalties to people who aren't white, which of course doesn't make any sense.
David, the voter suppression stories, they always, as we get closer to the elections, we start really seeing the ugliest part of these stories surface. One thing that this is North Carolina's story, but it's just an example of what's going on throughout the country. Just so happens that North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory signed one of the most comprehensive, ugly suppression bills ever. And that's no exaggeration. And then, of course, the Thomas Schroeder, who was a George Bush hack appointee, he says, yeah, that looks fine. And we're going to see this time and time again where you have Republican judges that are reviewing these vile kinds of acts that take place by their Republican governor and the Republican legislators. And you're going to see judges who really are not judges. They're more politicians that are sitting on a judge's bench saying, yeah, I'm going to rubber stamp that. We saw that in North Carolina, didn't we?
We sure did. And the right is getting increasingly desperate when they see those headlines of how demographics are shifting in this country and how non-Hispanic whites are no longer the majority by a slim margin. They're at 49.8% of minority now in public schools in the U.S. They kind of have two options, right? One is, let's reform the policies such that they are not kryptonite to minority voters, or let's just figure out a way to prevent people from voting. Let's do gerrymandering. Let's do voter suppression and voter ID. And so far, it seems like they're choosing the latter.
Well, one thing we're seeing on a state level, we are seeing people fight back. And the way that we're seeing fight back is to say there are other parts of the Voting Rights Act that we can call on besides the part that the U.S. Supreme Court completely obliterated. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court knew exactly what they're doing when they took away the right to say that we're going to presume that any changes you make to voting rights are going to be done for racial motivations, for racism in the clearest sense. We're going to presume that if you change your laws in that place like Alabama or South Carolina or North Carolina or Mississippi or these suspect states that have had this long history of racism, that if you do anything, we're going to presume it's illegal and we're going to nullify it. Supreme Court took that away, and then all of a sudden we're left now with the states having to say, we're going to prove to you that this was done on purpose. So in North Carolina, they went there and they tried to make a presentation and say, we want to prove to you that this was done on purpose. And they may as well have been talking to a wall.
Oh, no question about it. And you're right that at the state level, there are some good things happening. Some people are getting active. But even when you look at what's going on, not too far from North Carolina in Florida, the redrawn congressional district map is almost indistinguishable from the one that was rendered unconstitutional. And just every attempt is being made to keep the status quo there of suppressing votes and really making it difficult for people who are likely to vote more for Democrats than for Republicans to be able to vote.
Well, we've always seen gerrymandering, and certainly the Democrats have done that in the past, but the judges looking at these new districts right now are saying, look, this is beyond creative. This is beyond practical. This is a direct effort. And it's not just a racism issue. It is a way to nullify the political impact of a particular party, which is the Democrats.
Yeah, it's the exact same reason why the Koch brothers and similar groups are getting involved in school boards and hyper-local elections, because you build this base at the local level, and then it leads back into having more influence when things like the districts are redrawn or there are local issues that can bolster the national platform. It's a strategy that I wish wasn't working for the right, but to some extent it is.
We used to be able to say, well, it's just the House of Representatives. Don't worry, it's just the House of Representatives. But look at the impact this dysfunctional House of Representatives has had just in this last cycle.
Yeah, and remember, coming in saying our number one priority is jobs, 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 doing absolutely nothing to create jobs, instead just standing in the way of President Obama, then suing him over his need to use executive orders to circumvent their open and overt obstructionism. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of havoc that they've been able to wreak.
That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.